certain types of discrimination happen and you know that they're racially motivated, but people will say, oh no, that was not racism because it was not direct. Like, your work continues to get praise. When it first comes through, it is over analyzed, and they want to check at different points. What are you doing? Where are you at? Because of other people's discrimination against you, you might start to over analyze your work. You might start to put unrealistic pressures on yourself. Hello everyone, my name is Kudzie Mapiye, and on this channel I do videos about my life living here in Australia, and I also share different life lessons that I've learned along the way. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about 3 types of racism that can be found in the workplace. And I have spoken about racism a lot on this channel, and I think the reason I talk a lot about racism is it's not as obvious as what a lot of people would think. There are so many different ways that people can have like racist behaviors, and what it causes is actually racial trauma to the people who experience the racism. Another thing is racial gaslighting, where things happen, certain types of discrimination happen, and you know that they're racially motivated, but people will say, oh no, that was not racism because it was not direct. Like, someone didn't just walk up to you and call you the N-word or say something like so outrightly racist that you can actually pinpoint it. And I feel like racism really affects the mental health of people from multicultural backgrounds, because it adds up. Like, every little bit of racism adds up over time, and you start to really suffer from some kind of racial PTSD, where you almost like expect it and you're almost over vigilant when it comes to racism. Like, you're questioning everything. Is this racially motivated? Is this the type of racism? And it can really do your head in. So I always like to shed light on issues relating to racism, because it's a reality. We face it. And if you look like me, I always say one of the things that you can expect is to experience racism. I want to talk about the types, or maybe 3 types of racism that you can find in the workplace, because I feel like workplaces are still very much like, rife with racism. I feel it happens a lot. It happens, to a lot of people, but it's just not spoken about because of the ways in which it happens. Now, the first type of racism I want to talk about is undermining. Now, this is an interesting form of racism because it's, I'll share an example of how I have personally experienced undermining, which is racially motivated in a workplace environment. So I remember I had a team of people that, I was leading, managing, or whatever. And one of the things that used to happen is there was a manager who was above me. So I noticed that certain members of the team would always take issues to the manager who was above me instead of bringing issues to me directly. So that is one form of undermining. Now, you might be thinking that can happen to people of any race, and it can happen to like even people, white people can be undermined. How I knew that this was racially motivated is the people who were doing it, I have seen them in another team, and they had another leader who was, a white person, and they didn't exhibit those behaviors. And this was in the same team. So there was a leader there, and then they moved somewhere, and then I got into the team, and these things started happening, and I found, this is interesting. When this other person was in the role, this never used to happen. So undermining is one of the forms of racism. And I feel like it happens in such a way that I feel like it is to intentionally annoy you, because it's not covered. Like, you will tell people your expectations. You'll be clear on how work should be like escalated, how things should be escalated, but you still see people choosing to go above you to undermine you because they feel more comfortable when they're given advice by a white person. They feel more confident when their work is checked by a white person, and all those other things. So that is one of the forms of racism that I find predominantly for people in leadership roles. So if people are in leadership roles in whatever capacity in a workplace environment, undermining can be one of the most common forms of racism. And with that, like, if you have ever experienced that, if you are currently experiencing that, or if you do find yourself in that situation, one way that I have dealt with that is to just ask the person, because one of the most effective ways to deal with racism is to call it out when it happens. Like, you see someone undermining your authority, the best thing to do is to just take them aside and tell them the behavior that you noticed, to say, hey, I noticed that, you keep doing blah, blah, blah. And I just wanted to find out why it's happening. And I've noticed that when this other person was in the same role, you didn't exhibit those same behaviors. And people, one thing I've noticed about people is they don't like to be called out on their behavior. And usually when you call out someone on their behavior, it's like you've put a spotlight on it. Like when someone comes to rob a house, like when a robber is there, like, and you have those security like lights that just switch on, it chases people away. It's actually a psychological thing that when people are doing something that is not good, they like to go almost undetected. Like, they don't want to be called out on it, and being called out would actually help in stopping or significantly minimizing that behavior. Just like like when you shine a light on someone who's coming to break into a property, they run away because they feel so exposed. So you need to be confident enough to sit that person down, and it does not have to be in a dramatic way. It doesn't have to be like in a confrontational way. It could be in a very calm way where you bring the points that you have noticed, and the sooner you do it, the better. As in, soon after the event, when you start noticing the event, and don't let it build up. Do it as soon as you notice the behavior. And if you can, like, document the different times that it has happened and demonstrate that this is actually a trait, like this is actually something that is ongoing, so that it can help to validate your experience. And even if someone denies that they have been doing that, the fact that you have called them out shows that you are actually aware of what they're doing. They might be thinking they're smart and they're going about things, in a sneaky way, like, and they don't think you notice that it's racially motivated. But the moment you tell them that, hey, I feel like this might be racially motivated because of blah, blah, blah. And I feel like when it comes to racism, people don't want to be outright in calling out that, I feel like what is happening here is racially motivated. If you feel like that, then you should say that and allow that person an opportunity to maybe shed light on why they might be doing the things that they're doing. So that is one form of racism that you can find in the workplace, and that is undermining. Another form of racism is micromanaging. This is one of my worst forms of racism that I have experienced. It is super annoying, and it's I'll just explain to you from my experience how I have experienced micromanaging that is racially motivated. So again, it'll be in a setting where you have like people who are different races, and you find that the way one person is treating the different people, like you can see the massive difference in how people are being treated by the one person. So it could be like you are doing something and someone just likes to go through it with a fine tooth comb. I call it, like, I feel like when people are using micromanaging as a form of racism, it really feels like they're going through your work with a fine tooth comb. For other people, they can present their work and it's like, oh, they're white or they're of this other race. It should be like, the work should be right, like it should be okay. We shouldn't need to overcheck it or even really check it. It's like we don't even need to check it because they're this race, they should be good at their job. And I find that my experience as a Black woman in the workplace, in different workplaces that I have experienced this, is you find that your work, even if that your work is of a very good standard, and I always take pride in my work. I like to take a lot of time, put in a lot of effort to produce good quality work, and for yourself that you have done really good work, and it's actually sometimes way above the standard. But you find that there's a lot of nitpicking, there's a lot of over analyzing, picking out, trying to find mistakes in your work, and in the way that they don't try and find mistakes in another person's work. So, that is another form of, racism that can exist in the workplace. And again, how to know that it is racially motivated is when you see that there are people of other races, it's being done by the same person and they're reacting to you in a different way than they're reacting to people who are not of your race. And it is happening consistently. It's like they have a specific way of managing you versus the way they manage other people, and they have not specifically told you that your work is below standard, because if it was really an issue that maybe your work is really below standard and you need to pull up your socks, they would have had a conversation with you or said something. But you find that even though like your work continues to get praise, when it first comes through, it is over analyzed, and they want to check at different points. What are you doing? Where are you at? Let me have a look. Like constantly wanting to check, constantly wanting to see what you're doing and how you are doing it. Feels like there is literally a microscope like on your work, and it's even a small mistake can be amplified. Like if you make one minor mistake, it's spoken about, it's amplified, it's broadcast. But when other people make mistakes, it is not so, it is covered up, or they treat it like, oh, it's just a small mistake. And that is one of the types of racism that exists in the workplace, which is micromanaging. Now, going on to the third and final one that I want to talk about in this video is overloading. Now, this is when people of, if you are of a different race, you will be overloaded with work. And I feel like this is a way to kind of trip you up, like especially if you are a high performing person and you are obviously and visibly performing more than your peers who might not be the same race as you. You might find that you might tend to be overloaded with work in a way that is not to praise you or to promote you. Like you're not being rewarded for the extra work you're doing. You are actually just being overloaded, and the same expectation, the same standard of work is still expected, even though other people are not being given as much work as you are being given. And again, like the other points I've raised before, it is happening from one individual, and you can see this distinct difference when it comes to your work. And I feel like, it's when you are someone who is, of a different color, you become so aware of how racism is done that you can pick it up so easily. And even though other people in the team might not see it, like, when a person does, is racist or, is exhibiting certain behaviors because of the color of your skin or because of your cultural background. Even you can start to read facial expressions of people, how they react to you versus how they react to other people. Like those are the little hints that you can begin to pick up when it comes to racism. And when something happens to you over and over and over and over again, it just becomes even easier to pick up. So that's where that issue of racial trauma happens, when you have experienced racism so many times, and you start to be quite hyper vigilant about it. And when it happens, like you pick it up pretty quickly. Like it's no longer, even in the most subtle ways, you become so aware of it. It's almost like your mind is expecting it. And I feel like that is very unfortunate for people to live expecting to be discriminated, people to live expecting for people to treat them differently, for people to disadvantage them because of their cultural background or because of the color of their skin. And I always feel that, when you feel you are experiencing racism, sometimes I know that, not everyone might feel comfortable or confident to approach the person. I feel like in whatever form and to whomever you might do it, you need to speak up. Whether if you find someone who's just a friend or a confidant, your partner, whoever it might be, you need to speak up about your experiences. Because if something is traumatic and it is happening to you, the worst thing that you can do is to just keep it to yourself, or to brush it off, or to explain it away, to say, oh, maybe it's because of this, or maybe it's because of this. Because that is gaslighting. Like you are actually denying your own experience, and you are putting the blame on yourself, and burdening yourself with trying to change it and shift things that probably don't need to be changed and shifted. Maybe you're performing perfectly fine, but because of other people's discrimination against you, you might start to overanalyze your work. You might start to put unrealistic pressures on yourself. And for me, issues of racism, there are things that I am really passionate about speaking of, because obviously I have experienced racism numerous times. I live in a country that does not have a lot of people who look like me, who are from my cultural background, and it always attracts here and there some form of racism. And I feel like, particularly in the workplace, we do spend a lot of time at work, and it needs to be a safe space. And at the end of the day, people need to work. People need to be employed. People have bills. People have responsibilities. And inevitably, they're going to find themselves in workplaces. And unfortunately, inevitably, again, they're going to find themselves facing racism. But they don't need to suffer alone. And they can get support from different people that are around them. Like for me, I have always found comfort in sharing my experiences. Like, if I experience something that I feel is negative, that I feel is unfair, I always like to get it off my chest, and it always helps me to feel better. And whenever I get the opportunity, I always try to address that issue with the people involved, because that is one of the most empowering things that you can do for yourself, is standing up for yourself. Like if you stand up for yourself, you begin to build like a certain level of resilience. You become confident in your ability to stand up for yourself, to fight for yourself, and to defend yourself. There is nothing as debilitating, there's nothing as disempowering as feeling like you can't do anything about it, or you can't say anything about it. It's just like you've got this muzzle on your mouth, like you can't speak. If you say something, you're afraid that you're going to get into trouble. As long as you're respectful in the way that you come across, as long as you bring facts to the table, there is always opportunity to raise issues when it comes to discrimination. Never feel like you should keep quiet. Never feel like you talking is going to upset people, or is going to rock the boat. If people have been intentionally unfair to you, intentionally not treating you the way that you should be treated, the way that you deserve to be treated, then you should definitely stand up for yourself and feel empowered to do that. And I've noticed that, sometimes when some people are uncomfortable to talk about it. So even if you go and confide, like I'm talking in a workplace environment, if you go and confide in other workmates, they might try and convince you that what is happening is not racism, because they feel so uncomfortable themselves about the whole issue that they just want to brush it off. They just want to push it to the side, and they just want to pretend like it's not happening. To be honest, it is one of the most uncomfortable things to talk about and to raise and to discuss with other people. So, never feel like you are alone or you can't say anything when it comes to, racism. And what's even worse is, I just want to share this particular example that I once experienced in the workplace. Every workplace has, employment assistance programs, which are called different things in different organizations, where they've got like an external provider who offers like support to the workplace, and whether it's to do with stress, like financial support. It can even be diet and nutrition, any kind of wellness, they can offer support. Like sometimes you feel there is a lack of representation, and the person that you might go and talk to looks like the people who have been doing these things. And I have had the situation where I have spoken to someone of, one of the providers who provide this, wellness support or, emotional support to employees. And they have I've said, this is what I've been experiencing in the workplace, blah, 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 blah. And they've been like, oh, are you sure it's not just because, they think this? Are you sure? Is that gaslighting? Are you sure it's racism? Are you not overthinking this? Are you not? When you feel like someone is having that kind of response towards you, and you feel that, you are confident and you know exactly what's going on and you know what you've experienced, you do not have to continue that conversation with that person, because you do not deserve to be gaslighted. You should go and seek support from people who will actually stop to listen and understand your experience, and people who actually have an understanding that discrimination does occur and the different ways it occurs that are not as obvious. Because people think if you say racism, it should be something so obvious, and they do not count, microaggressions. They do not count some of the masked ways in which it manifests in the workplace. So I hope that this video validates the experience of someone who has been going through these 3 things that I have been talking about. I hope it also empowers someone to stand up for themselves, to discuss the issues, to address the issues, and to raise them, so that you can feel, more empowered and help to reduce, minimize, and hopefully eliminate those experiences in your particular workplace. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.